Guys, tonight we're diving straight into a story that you might think belongs in one of those dusty novels on the bottom shelf at the library. But no, this happened right here in America in a neighborhood not too different from yours. And you probably won't survive this story without clenching your fists, because it's about betrayal in broad daylight, the kind you don't expect from family, but the kind that cuts the deepest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. I want you here with me in this moment, in your own living room, wherever you are right now, your town, your city, your quiet place at night. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. I can still see it the way the morning light broke through the kitchen blinds as if it had something urgent to reveal. The smell of coffee, cheap coffee, not the kind my late husband loved to grind carefully on weekends, floated across the room. That was the first sign of change now that I think about it. He had passed 2 years ago, and with him went the carefulness, the respect for tradition, the slow grind of beans that filled the house with meaning. I had tried to hold on, but when you live with people who don't see the point, things just slip away. My son and his wife had moved in to take care of me, but it always felt like I was the one tiptoeing around them. The workshop, that sacred place behind the house, was his pride. Rows of tools, the smell of sawdust, the jars of screws and nails lined like soldiers. He built our first dining table there, the same one where we had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and every Thanksgiving for decades. It was not just wood and metal. It was our history, his breath embedded in every corner. One afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping, just bread, milk, a little fruit, and I found the door wide open. Empty shelves, bare walls, echoes where his hammer once hung. She had sold it all, without asking, without a word. She smiled when she told me as if she had done me a favor. "We need the space," she said. "Do you know that feeling when your ears ring but there's no sound around? That was me." A part of me thought maybe this was some terrible misunderstanding. I asked my son where his father's tools had gone, and he wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just shrugged like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew and muttered, "It was taking up room." My hands shook so badly I had to grip the counter, but not one of them noticed. That's the oddest part about humiliation. It doesn't require an audience. Sometimes it's just you, your memories, and the cold indifference of people you once raised. Mainstream psychology says that when people lose something connected to a loved one, they grieve all over again as if the death repeats itself in fragments. And that's exactly what I felt the second funeral of my husband right there in that workshop. Yet people still debate whether holding on to objects from the past keeps us grounded or traps us. For me, it was a lifeline. For her, it was clutter. I didn't scream, though. The ache in my chest begged for it. I didn't cry, not right there in front of her perfect manicure and smug little tilt of the chin. Instead, I walked into the backyard, sat on the cold stone bench, and let the wind sting my face. I could almost hear his voice, gentle, reassuring, but tinged with disbelief. They did what my neighbors, who peeked over the fence, sometimes probably saw me that day. I wonder what they thought. Maybe they assumed I was just an old widow with too much time on her hands mourning things that didn't matter. But they didn't see the betrayal. They didn't feel the crack in my bones when I realized my son, my only son, had chosen convenience over his father's legacy. There's a strange cultural fact I once read in Japan. Families often keep a butsudan, a Buddhist altar with personal items of the deceased, sometimes even the tools they used in life. They honor these objects as vessels of memory, believing they carry a kind of lingering spirit. Imagine explaining that to my daughter-in-law. She would laugh and say, "That's nonsense, we need more storage." Yet deep inside, I knew she wasn't just clearing space. She was erasing him, erasing me, erasing everything before she arrived. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of her laughter through the walls. That cruel laugh, it reminded me of the time in the hotel lobby when she mocked me for wearing outdated clothes. Do you remember that kind of laugh? The kind that isn't just about the joke, but about the power, the reminder of who belongs and who doesn't. My son's silence in the background was worse than her words. Silence has a way of burning longer than insults. As I lay in bed, I thought about how quickly life turns. One minute you're the matriarch, the one holding the family together, and the next you're just extra. Like furniture in a room tolerated but never cherished. I thought about how in some states inheritance laws still protect surviving spouses, even when children try to move assets around. It struck me as a peculiar lifeline, the law standing like an invisible shield when blood fails. People still debate whether laws should intervene in private family matters, but at that moment I felt a strange comfort in knowing at least something beyond my control might still be on my side. The workshop was gone. My husband's legacy reduced to cash I would never see. But something inside me didn't break, it hardened, and though I stayed quiet inside, I began to plan. The truth is, betrayal doesn't end you. It sharpens you like sandpaper against raw wood. And I knew one day she'd regret underestimating me. The morning after the workshop was cleared out, I walked down the hallway of my own home and it felt like I was sneaking through someone else's house. That's the strangest part when the house you built, where you painted every wall, planted every flower bed, becomes alien ground. My slippers seemed too loud on the wood floors as if I were trespassing. She was already in the kitchen, clinking her spoon against a mug, scrolling through her phone. No hello, no eye contact. My son came in a few minutes later, tie crooked, and gave me a distracted nod. That's when I realized it. I wasn't mother anymore. I was background noise. You might not believe it, but in America, studies show a growing number of elderly parents live in their children's homes or invite children into theirs, hoping for support. Yet instead of support, many parents end up like me, outsiders, invisible, a silent burden in the very space they built. Some say it's cultural decline. Others say it's economics. People still debate whether financial stress breeds disrespect or if it just reveals what was always there. I didn't care which was true. I only knew I was living as a guest in my own home. It hit me hardest at dinner time. When I used to cook, the table was sacred ground. My husband and I would make space for conversation. No phones, no television, just food and stories. Now dinner meant takeout containers dropped on the counter. She'd shout foods here and leave it at that. They'd eat in front of the TV, laughing at shows I couldn't follow, while I quietly sat at the table chewing slowly, so the sound of my fork wouldn't interrupt their laughter. The grandson sometimes joined me, and I could see the confusion in his little eyes. Why is Grandma eating alone? But even he was pulled toward the glow of the television eventually. One night, I decided to sit with them in the living room. I thought maybe I was being too dramatic, maybe I needed to adjust. But as I lowered myself onto the couch, my daughter-in-law glanced at me and said, "Mom, maybe you'll be more comfortable at the table. These shows are probably too loud for you." She smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was dismissal wrapped in sugar. I forced a chuckle, said something like, "Oh, you're probably right. My ears aren't what they used to be," making a little joke to diffuse the tension. But inside I was boiling. I started noticing small things. My mug replaced by a chipped one, while theirs matched in a neat set. My husband's armchair given away without asking, replaced by a sleek recliner she ordered online. Even the curtains, she said they were too heavy, so she took them down, leaving the windows bare. The sunlight poured in, exposing everything, like even the house was stripped naked. I was being erased, one curtain rod at a time. There's an old custom I once read about from rural Italy. Families there keep a stanza dei nonni, a room for grandparents where the elders' things remain untouched, a mark of respect. Even when space is tight, they maintain it as if to say, "We wouldn't exist without you." Here in America, I was being squeezed out of my own space inch by inch. People still debate whether old traditions like that have value in modern times, but I tell you, sitting on the edge of my stripped-down bedroom, I felt the weight of those debates in my bones. The humiliation came in waves. Once I overheard her on the phone telling a friend, "It's like living with a tenant you can't charge rent to." I don't think she knew I was in the hallway folding laundry with my arthritic hands. My son, sitting right next to her, didn't correct her, didn't defend me. He just kept scrolling on his phone. And do you know what I did? I actually folded faster, as if speed could make me invisible. That's how small I felt. But I wasn't blind. I saw the patterns. She was positioning herself as queen of the castle, and my son, well, he had always been easier to lead than to stand on his own. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I sheltered him too much after his father died. Or maybe some people are just born weak, always leaning, never standing. People still debate whether children fail their parents because of upbringing or because of their own choices. That night, I stopped debating. I simply accepted the answer didn't matter. What mattered was survival. Still, I found little ways to resist. I made sure to water the garden early in the morning before she woke just so the roses my husband planted wouldn't die. I polished the silverware she never used, tucking it back in the drawer like a secret rebellion. I even kept one of his old wrenches hidden in my closet just to touch it sometimes, to feel that rough handle against my palm, and remember who I had been before all this. And you know what's strange? That wrench, a simple tool, became my anchor. Studies show people often cling to symbolic objects in times of stress, not for their material value, but for the psychological reassurance they bring. Some experts call it transitional anchoring. People still debate if it's healthy or if it prevents moving on. For me, it was survival. Living like a guest in my own house wasn't just humiliating, it was clarifying. I could see my place, see their game. She wanted control, he gave it to her, and I was expected to fade quietly. But I had no intention of fading. I started planning quietly like someone digging a tunnel under a prison yard, step by step, thought by thought, waiting for the day when their laughter would turn to silence. It was late on a Sunday afternoon when I stumbled across the old box of photographs tucked away in the back of a closet I was rarely allowed to open anymore. You know how dust collects in forgotten corners, thick gray clinging like the years themselves. That's what coated the lid. I dragged it out, coughing as the dust rose like smoke, and sat cross-legged on the floor, prying it open like a treasure chest. Inside were hundreds of snapshots, worn Polaroids, faded prints, the kind you hold up to the light because they've dimmed with time. My husband smiling in his workshop, my son holding a baseball bat too big for his skinny arms. Family picnics where we all laughed without thinking about the years to come. Each photograph was a fragment, a puzzle piece of a life we had built, and in that moment, I realized just how quickly the younger generation erases history when it doesn't fit their decor. I laid the photos out on the floor in neat lines, as if I were setting up an exhibition only for myself. The grandson walked in, rubbing his eyes, and asked Grandma, "Who's that?" pointing to an image of his grandfather standing proudly beside the first rocking chair he built. It broke my heart that this child living in the same house where his grandfather had lived didn't even know him. I told him stories while pointing at the pictures about how his grandfather could fix anything with just his hands, how he once carved me a jewelry box for our anniversary, how he always smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco. His eyes lit up with curiosity. For a fleeting moment, it was as if the past had come alive again. But then she appeared. My daughter-in-law stood at the doorway, arms folded, lips tight. "Why are you making a mess?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. I explained softly, "These are family memories. He should know where he comes from." She rolled her eyes. "Old clutter. No one cares about printed photos anymore. Everything's digital now." With that, she turned and walked away, muttering about how she'd clean it up later. It was like a knife to the chest. These weren't just scraps of paper. They were evidence that we had lived, worked, struggled, and loved. There's a mainstream fact. Psychologists often repeat children who are connected to their family history tend to have stronger self-esteem and resilience. It's called the intergenerational self. People still debate whether stories of the past can really fortify a child against life's challenges, but I've seen it. A child who knows he comes from a line of builders, survivors, dreamers, he walks taller. And here was my daughter-in-law dismissing history as clutter, depriving her own son of his roots. I carefully stacked the photos back into the box and carried them to my bedroom as if smuggling contraband. That night, I spread them on my bed and stared for hours. I remembered the sweat on my husband's brow as he built that workshop from scratch, hauling beams in the summer sun. I remembered the birthday when my son asked for a bike we couldn't afford, so his father fixed up a broken one from a neighbor's yard, repainting it red, so it gleamed like new. Do you think my son remembered that now? Or did his wife's disdain for old junk erase those sacrifices from his memory? People still debate whether children truly forget or whether they choose to forget because it's easier. Either way, it felt like I was the only one carrying the weight of remembrance. The following weekend, I decided to hang a few of those photos in the hallway. Just 3 frames, one of my husband, in the workshop, one of our family at the beach, and one of me holding my newborn son. Nothing gaudy, just a small reminder of where we came from. By Monday morning, they were gone. The nails still stuck in the wall, empty. I searched the trash, and sure enough, there they were. My photographs crumpled, bent, tossed like leftovers. She had thrown them away without saying a word. When I confronted her, her response was chilling in its simplicity. "This is my house now, and I don't want depressing old pictures on the wall." My house. My heart stopped. People forget how cruel words can sound when said casually. It wasn't just disrespect, it was erasure, plain and sharp. I stood there gripping the trash bag, hearing my son shuffle in the kitchen, but not saying a single thing. Silence again. His silence was a hammer pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, "Do you remember who paid for your college? Do you remember the years I worked double shifts so you could play baseball?" But the words stuck. Instead, I took the pictures back to my room, smoothed them as best as I could, and tucked them into the bottom drawer of my dresser. There's a peculiar custom in some Appalachian families. When a parent dies, the children are expected to keep one item a quilt, a photo, a book, and pass it down. It's not legally binding, just cultural respect. That one item becomes a thread in the family fabric. Standing in my room that night, smoothing those crumpled photos, I thought of that tradition. What thread would my grandson inherit if everything was sold, tossed, or mocked? Would he ever know who we really were? Later that week, a neighbor dropped by. She was about my age, widowed too, and she brought over some cookies. She glanced at the bare walls and whispered, "Where are all your photos? I used to love seeing them." My throat tightened. I didn't answer. Because what could I say? That I was a stranger here, that my memories had been thrown into a trash bag, so I just smiled weakly and said, "We're redecorating." A joke, half-truth, and humiliation rolled into one. That night I lay awake again, thinking about those pictures, those fragile pieces of history, and something hardened in me further. If she thought she could erase me, she was wrong. If my son thought silence would make me fade, he was mistaken. I might have been quiet, but I wasn't powerless. I had knowledge about laws, about inheritance, about what was truly mine. People still debate whether revenge is worth it or if dignity lies in walking away. But when your own history is being torn from the walls, you don't walk away. You anchor yourself. And so in the quiet hours of the night, I made a silent vow. I would protect what remained. I would guard my husband's memory, our sacrifices, and the little dignity I had left. They might think I was old and harmless, but they had no idea what strength lives in silence. I remember the exact evening when humiliation moved from inside the house to the open air where neighbors could see, hear, and judge. It was supposed to be a family outing, something simple, an afternoon walk through the farmer's market in town. I hadn't been out much, so when my son suggested I come along, I agreed. Hoping maybe this was an olive branch, I dressed carefully, choosing a soft lavender blouse and my best slacks, the ones my husband used to say made me look ready for Sunday. I even wore the brooch he gave me on our 20th anniversary, a little silver flower with a pearl in the center. It made me feel connected to him, like I wasn't going alone. The market was bustling, children, running vendors, shouting out their prices, the smell of roasted corn mixing with fried dough. I felt alive, reminded of better times when my husband and I used to stroll together, buying apples we didn't need, just for the joy of choosing them. My grandson held my hand, tugging me toward a stall with wooden toys. For a moment, I felt like a real grandmother again, not the background shadow I'd been reduced to at home. But she noticed. My daughter-in-law. Her eyes flicked from my hand holding the boys to the brooch on my blouse. She smirked, then leaned toward a neighbor she'd spotted near the flowers. Loud enough for the woman to hear, she said, "Oh, don't you just love how she still dresses? Like it's the 1950s, I keep telling her we're in the 21st century, but she insists on these little costumes." Her laugh cut through the air like glass breaking. People turned their heads. Some smiled politely, others looked away. My son chuckled softly, not defending me, not even noticing the way my cheeks burned. There's a mainstream truth. Public humiliation is one of the most corrosive experiences in family life. Experts say it erodes bonds faster than private arguments because it strips dignity in front of outsiders. People still debate whether it's worse to be insulted at home or in public, but standing there with produce stalls all around me, I knew the answer. Public humiliation digs deeper because it brands you. It makes you a spectacle. I tried to smile to pretend it didn't hurt. I made a weak joke about being vintage like a fine wine. The neighbor laughed politely, but my daughter-in-law rolled her eyes and pulled my grandson away, muttering about how he needed to see real toys, not dusty ones. My son lingered a second, then followed her, And there I was, left standing among baskets of peaches, clutching my purse like a shield trying not to crumble. I wandered to the side of the market near a bench and sat down. The wood was warm from the sun, but inside I felt cold. A stranger, an older woman sitting beside me, leaned over and said quietly, "Don't let them see you break. Families can be cruel." She didn't know. Me didn't know the details, but she knew enough. I nodded, grateful for the words, and stared at the ground. Funny how strangers can sometimes see your truth clearer than your own blood. On the drive home, silence filled the car, broken only by the hum of the tires. My grandson dozed in the backseat, his head leaning against the window. My son drove his wife, scrolling through her phone. I stared at the landscape flying by and thought about how humiliation leaves an aftertaste like sour milk that won't wash out of your mouth. I replayed her laugh, his silence, the eyes of the neighbors. Over and over, the reel kept spinning. That night in bed, I thought about rituals in other cultures. In some Native American traditions, elders are given a seat of honor at gatherings, their words heard first, their presence revered. Imagine that compared to my seat on the splintered bench by the peaches. People still debate whether modern society has lost respect for elders or if it's just family by family. I didn't need a debate. I was living proof that something was broken. But here's the strange thing, humiliation didn't just wound me, it sharpened me. As if every cruel laugh, every dismissive gesture, every silence from my son was chipping away the softness in me, leaving something harder underneath. It reminded me of my husband's words when he'd sand wood in the workshop. Sometimes you have to strip it down to bring out the strength. That was me. Stripped, humiliated, but underneath strength was showing. The next morning, I watered the roses as always. My neighbor waved from across the fence and called out, "I saw you at the market yesterday. You look lovely in lavender." Her words warmed me not because of the compliment itself, but because they proved something: I wasn't invisible. People noticed, and that meant I still mattered, no matter how hard my daughter-in-law tried to erase me. As I trimmed the dead blooms, I whispered to myself, "They think they've won, but they don't know me." The petals fell to the ground, red as drops of memory. It was after that cruel day at the market that I decided silence alone wouldn't be enough. If I was going to survive in my own house, I needed to find some leverage. And leverage, I learned, doesn't always come from strength. It comes from knowledge. That's how I ended up sitting in the corner of a quiet law office on Main Street, my palms pressed against my lap to hide their trembling. The receptionist had offered me water, and I accepted, though I barely sipped it. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, leaned forward and asked what brought me there. My voice cracked, but I told him the truth. They sold my husband's workshop without asking. I don't want to be erased from my own life. He nodded slowly, tapping a pen against his notebook. Then he explained something I hadn't known. In many states across America, inheritance laws include what's called an elective share. That means no matter what will is written, a surviving spouse cannot be completely cut out. Even if my son and his wife tried to control everything, I still had a right, by law, to a portion of what my husband left behind. It was like someone had handed me a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. People still debate whether these laws are fair, especially when blended families are involved. But in that moment, I didn't care about fairness. I cared about survival. I asked him quietly, "So even if they try to push me out, I can fight back?" He smiled gently. "Yes, you have more power than you realize." That sentence lodged itself in my heart. More power than I realized. I left that office with the papers tucked in my purse like contraband, my steps firmer than they had been in months. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like someone preparing for battle. When I returned home, I saw her car in the driveway. The workshop door was still open now, an empty shell filled with boxes of her seasonal decorations and piles of things she called future projects. The sight made me ache, but it also lit a fire. That was once his space. Now it was storage. But soon, I thought it would be her illusion of control that became nothing more than storage. That evening at dinner, the conversation drifted to money. It always did. She talked about upgrading the kitchen, tearing out the old cabinets my husband had installed with his bare hands. "We could knock out this wall, make it more open," she said, gesturing with her fork as if the house were hers to redesign. My son nodded along, too eager to please. Then she turned to me. "Don't you think, Mom, wouldn't it be nice to modernize this place?" I sipped my water, slowly buying time. The joke in me wanted to say, yes, let's modernize by replacing you. Instead, I smiled faintly. Some things are worth preserving. She laughed that same cruel laugh from the hotel lobby from the farmer's market, and once again my son stayed silent. But I had a secret now, a whisper of power tucked in my purse. That's when I began keeping notes. Small things like the dates she mocked me, the times my son refused to intervene, the changes she made to the house without permission. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Lawyers like details. And if I was going to protect what remained, I'd give them details. There's a strange custom I once read about from Scandinavia families, sometimes keep a memory ledger, a book, where events good and bad are written down passed through generations. Not just births and deaths, but quarrels, reconciliations, betrayals. Imagine that. A written record of family truth impossible to erase. People still debate whether that's a gift or a curse, but I couldn't help thinking how valuable it would be. My ledger was a notebook hidden under my mattress, each page filled with ink that no one else would see until the time came. The next week, I overheard her talking again, this time on the phone with her sister. Once she's gone, the house will be ours. We'll finally be free to do what we want. She said it so casually, as if I were a suitcase she couldn't wait to toss out. My chest tightened, but I didn't burst into the room. I simply wrote it down. Every cruel word became fuel. Every plan she revealed became a nail in the coffin of her confidence. And yet, even as anger burned in me, I found myself thinking about the strange irony of family life. In America, it's common for parents to plan their estates to benefit children to pass it forward. But what happens when those children, instead of honoring the sacrifice, use it as a weapon? People still debate whether parents should owe children anything once they're grown. I decided then I owed them nothing. Respect is earned, not inherited. That night, lying awake with the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, I pressed the notebook against my chest and whispered into the dark, "You think I'm weak, but you've forgotten I raised the man you call husband. I built the home you now claim as yours, and I will decide how this story ends." The cruelest laugh in the farmer's market still echoed in my mind. The sight of the workshop stripped bare still cut at my heart. But I had something sharper now than grief, resolve. And resolve, once lit, does not go out. The strange thing about betrayal is that it often blooms in silence. But loyalty, real loyalty, shows up in the smallest, most unexpected ways. For me, it came through the eyes of a boy too young to understand the full weight of what was happening in our house. My grandson. The one thread tying me to the possibility of kindness in a place that had grown colder than I could admit out loud. It started one evening when I was sitting in the backyard, the air thick with the smell of damp grass. I had taken my usual spot on the old stone bench, staring at the patch where the workshop once stood proud. Now it was just an empty shell filled with bins of Christmas ornaments and plastic storage tubs, her kingdom of clutter. The boy wandered out, clutching a half-broken toy truck. He looked at me with wide eyes, then at the shell of the workshop, and asked Grandma what used to be in there. That question struck me harder than I expected. No child should have to ask what stood in the place of his grandfather's legacy. I told him stories, the smell of sawdust, the sound of hammers, how his grandfather once built a birdhouse that still stood in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. His eyes grew round, and he said softly, "I wish I could have seen it." My throat tightened. "Me too," I whispered. Psychologists say that children who feel connected to grandparents often develop deeper empathy. It's one of those facts buried in studies most families never read, but I could see it playing out in his small gestures. He didn't mock me. He didn't roll his eyes. He just listened. People still debate whether a child's loyalty can resist the influence of parents who dismiss the elder generation. But sitting there in the fading light, I felt a spark of hope. He started visiting my room more often after that. Sometimes he'd sit on the edge of the bed while I folded laundry. Other times he'd ask me to tell him stories about the old days. His favorite was the one about how his grandfather and I once fixed a squeaky door with nothing but a bar of soap rubbed on the hinges. He laughed so hard at that, the kind of pure child laughter that fills a house in a way no expensive renovation ever could. But children are observant more than adults realize. One evening, as I tucked the old photographs back into my drawer, he asked, "Why doesn't Mommy like these pictures?" My heart clenched. I could have lied, told him she just prefers new things, but I couldn't bring myself to dishonor his curiosity with dishonesty. Sometimes I said slowly, People forget that old things have value. They think only new things matter, but that doesn't mean the old things stop being important. He nodded thoughtfully, as if absorbing a truth his parents hadn't taught him. One night during dinner, I noticed something remarkable. His mother made another one of her little comments this time about how I was hoarding things, keeping useless objects around. My son, as usual, stayed silent. But the boy looked up from his plate and said Grandpa's things weren't useless. They were special. The room froze. She shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass, but he held her gaze. Just for a moment I saw it, the courage that skips generations sometimes. My heart swelled with pride and sorrow all at once. Of course, she brushed it off with a laugh. Kids say the funniest things, but her laughter didn't erase the fact that her son had spoken truth, and truth has a way of echoing louder than mockery. That evening, after they all went to bed, I pulled out my notebook, the one hidden beneath my mattress, and I wrote it down. Not just her words, but his. Every cruel dismissal, every small act of kindness. The ledger was becoming more than evidence. It was becoming a record of loyalty and betrayal, a story that someday he might read. I imagined him as an adult holding that notebook, realizing that his grandmother had fought quietly to preserve dignity. There's a custom in parts of West Africa where grandparents pass down not just stories, but praise names, epithets of honor whispered to grandchildren to remind them of their lineage. I thought about that as I watched my grandson sleep one night on the couch curled up with a blanket. People still debate whether traditions like that matter in a modern world where everything is digital and fast. But I tell you this, children need anchors, and I intended to be his. But kindness didn't come without risk. The more he drifted toward me, the more his mother noticed. She began making comments like, "Don't bother Grandma too much, she needs her rest." Or, "Stop asking about the past, it makes her sad." But I wasn't sad when he asked. I was alive. Her attempts to cut him off only made me more determined to protect the bond. One afternoon when she left for errands, he sneaked into my room, carrying a small notebook of his own. "I want to write stories like you," he whispered. He had seen me jotting notes before and thought I was writing fairy tales. I smiled and gave him a pen. "Then start?" "Now," I said. He scribbled his first story. Grandpa built a chair. It was simple, but it was enough. And in that moment, I realized something profound. He was my heir, not in money or property, but in memory. He carried pieces of the past into the future, even if his parents tried to bury them. That night, I thought again about the lawyer's words, "You have more power than you realize." Power wasn't just legal, it was emotional, generational. If I left everything to my son, it would end in greed. But if I left it to my grandson, whether photographs, stories, or even the house itself, it would be preserved. People still debate whether skipping a generation in inheritance is wise or divisive, but I knew in my bones that love doesn't always flow neatly from parent to child. Sometimes it leaps. The boy had become my quiet ally. A glance across the dinner table, a whispered question at bedtime, a small act of defiance against his mother's dismissal. He probably didn't know it yet, but he was reminding me who I was. I wasn't just a burden. I wasn't just a relic. I was the keeper of memory, and memory is power. And so I began to plan not only for myself, but for him. Every story I told, every photograph I saved, every note in my ledger, it was all for the day when he would understand fully. And when that day came, I wanted him to know the truth, that his grandmother had fought quietly with dignity against erasure. Birthdays are supposed to be soft moments. Candles, cake, laughter, even if it's forced, at least some acknowledgement of a life lived. I wasn't expecting a parade, but I thought maybe my son and his wife would honor me with decency, a card, perhaps dinner at the table. Instead, what I got was another reminder of how far I'd fallen in their eyes. The morning began quietly. I woke early, made myself coffee, and sat by the window, watching the sparrows dart in and out of the hedge. I remembered how my husband used to surprise me with breakfast on my birthday. Always pancakes, slightly burnt, always with too much syrup. I smiled at the memory, even though the house around me was silent. No happy birthday, no hug from my son. Just the low hum of the dishwasher running from last night's mess. By afternoon, I convinced myself maybe they were planning something later. People forget sometimes, I thought, but surely they wouldn't let the day slip by. When evening came, they called me into the dining room. The table was set takeout containers stacked neatly. No candles, no flowers, just a plastic bag of fried chicken and a bottle of soda. My heart sank, but I smiled anyway. Then she presented her gift. A small box, wrapped haphazardly, pushed across the table with a smirk. "Open it, Mom. We thought you'd love it." I peeled back the paper to reveal a bathroom scale. My son laughed weakly as if unsure whether it was a joke or not, but she grinned with full satisfaction. "We figured you could keep track of your health," she said. It was cruelty disguised as care humiliation, wrapped as humor. I stared at the scale heat rising in my cheeks. Did she think I couldn't see through the gesture? It wasn't about health. It was about control, about mocking the body that had given birth to the very man she now shared a bed with. I forced a chuckle because sometimes humor is the only shield. "Oh, I said so. Now I'll know how heavy your disrespect weighs." A light joke, the kind of quip old women are allowed to make. They laughed awkwardly, not realizing the barb underneath. Psychologists say that mockery within families often hides power struggles. A cruel gift, a dismissive comment, it's all about dominance. People still debate whether it's better to confront it openly or let it pass to keep peace. That night, I let it pass on the surface, but inside, I carved it into my memory ledger. Another entry, another nail. The grandson sat beside me, wide-eyed, clearly confused. "Grandma, why would they give you that?" he whispered later when no one was listening. I just smiled and tousled his hair. Sometimes people don't understand what others really need. He nodded, and I saw the flicker of protectiveness in his young eyes. Even at his age, he recognized the cruelty. That gave me strength. After dinner, they disappeared into the living room, laughing at some reality show while I cleared the table. Another small humiliation on my birthday, I was still the one cleaning up. As I scraped plates into the trash, I remembered another birthday years ago when my husband built me a cedar chest with his own hands. He stayed up all night sanding it smooth, surprising me in the morning with a gift made of love, not mockery. The chest still sat at the foot of my bed, filled with quilts and old letters, a reminder of a time when birthdays meant care. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the glow of the moon cutting through the bare window she had insisted on leaving curtainless. I thought about birthdays in other cultures, how in Mexico families celebrate with a piñata laughter and shared joy, or how in some native traditions a birthday is marked by giving, not receiving, to honor community. People still debate whether birthdays have lost their meaning in modern life, reduced to consumerism and shallow gestures. I didn't need a debate. I had a bathroom scale as proof. But humiliation has a strange way of clarifying resolve. As I tucked the ledger back under my mattress, I whispered to myself, "This is not how my story ends. They think they're in control. They think cruelty makes me smaller. But every laugh, every gift, and every dismissal, it makes me sharper." And in that moment, I knew my next step, the will. Not just a document of inheritance, but a weapon, a mirror, a truth bomb waiting to be dropped. They wanted to erase me, but I would write myself into permanence. The night after that cruel birthday dinner, I sat at my desk with the lamp casting a yellow glow across the room. My hands trembled as I smoothed out the papers I'd brought from the lawyer's office. Drafting a will is something people usually do in quiet dignity, surrounded by trusted advisors or loving children. For me, it was an act of defiance done in secret, as if I were plotting an escape from a prison built within my own home. I thought long and hard about what mattered most. The house, of course, was the central battlefield. My daughter-in-law had made no secret of her desire to claim it, already referring to it as hers, planning renovations that would wipe out every trace of history. My son, weak in his silence, would go along with whatever she demanded. But my grandson, that boy, was different. He had listened to my stories, touched the photographs with reverence, asked about the birdhouse his grandfather built. He was the only one who still saw me as more than furniture. And so as I put pen to paper, I decided he would inherit what truly mattered. But I didn't just think about money or property. I thought about legacy. There's a cultural custom in Greece where families sometimes leave behind not only material inheritance, but also letters, journals, or instructions for rituals as a way of carrying the spirit of the elder forward. People still debate whether that's sentimental nonsense or a meaningful extension of love. I decided I would do something similar. My ledger, the notebook under my mattress, filled with every cruelty, every kindness, every truth, I would leave it to him. Someday, he would read it and know what really happened in this house. As I drafted the will, I mixed practical matters with symbolic ones. The cedar chest my husband had built would go to the boy. The old photographs, too. The garden roses, those he had watered with me on early mornings I requested to be left untouched no matter who owned the house. And the house itself, that was the crown jewel of the document. I stipulated that it could not be sold, torn down, or mortgaged until my grandson reached adulthood. Until then, it would remain in trust, shielded from greedy hands. I smiled as I wrote the words, imagining the shock on her face when she realized her empire of plans had crumbled with the stroke of my pen. Of course I was careful. I knew if they discovered my plans too early, they would find ways to fight back. Families across America have dragged one another through court battles that last years, splitting siblings and bankrupting relationships. People still debate whether inheritance brings families closer together or rips them apart. I knew in my case it would be the latter, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about keeping peace, it was about protecting dignity. I worked slowly, adding clauses, consulting notes from my meeting with the lawyer. Elective share was my secret shield, ensuring I couldn't be cut out entirely. But beyond that, I crafted every line to reward loyalty and punish betrayal. The boy would inherit the heart of our family history, while his parents would receive very little. Just enough to keep them from contesting, but not enough to satisfy their greed. When I finished the draft, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. My heart pounded as if I had just run a race. But it wasn't fear, it was power. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to humiliation. I was shaping the ending. The next morning, I hid the draft inside the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I placed it beneath quilts so worn they carried the scent of decades, my secret fortress of fabric. My daughter-in-law never opened the chest. She had once called it an eyesore too heavy and old-fashioned. That insult had protected it. Sometimes disdain can be a blessing. Later that day, she knocked on my door with her sharp little smile. "Mom, we were thinking of turning your room into an office once you're, not here anymore." She said it casually, as if she were talking about repainting the garage. I looked up from my knitting, forced a smile, and said, "Oh, I think you'll find my room harder to claim than you expect." She blinked, confused by my calmness, then walked away, muttering something about how I was getting stranger every day. If only she knew. That night, my grandson sneaked in again with his notebook. "Grandma, can you tell me another story?" he whispered. I told him about the time his grandfather and I had to fix a leaky roof in the middle of a thunderstorm, slipping and laughing, soaked to the bone but triumphant when the rain finally stopped. His laughter filled the room, and I thought, yes, this is who I do it for. Not them, him. Psychologists say children who hear stories of family resilience often grow stronger in facing their own challenges. People still debate whether these stories shape character or simply entertain, but I saw it shaping him in real time. His spine straighter, his eyes brighter, as if each tale planted a seed of strength. The more time I spent with him, the clearer my will became in my mind. It wasn't just about punishing betrayal. It was about planting seeds of resilience, giving him tools to remember who he was and where he came from. My daughter-in-law might control the walls of this house for now, but she couldn't control the future I was weaving in secret. One evening, as I tucked the draft away again, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The lines on my face, the silver in my hair, they didn't look weak to me anymore. They looked like armor. Years of sacrifice, endurance, and survival. And I whispered to that reflection, "They will not erase me." The day of revelation arrived almost by accident, though I had been preparing for it quietly for months. It started with a Sunday dinner, one of those half-hearted attempts at family unity where everyone sits at the same table, but their souls are miles apart. My daughter-in-law had prepared lasagna, though she boasted about how it was a shortcut recipe she found online. Nothing like the homemade meals my husband and I used to craft with patience and laughter. My son sat slouched at the head of the table, eyes half closed from a long week, and my grandson poked at his plate, clearly more interested in the stories he knew I could tell than in the food in front of him. The conversation turned, as it often did, to property renovations and the future of the house. She spoke as if I wasn't even there. "Once Mom moves on, we'll finally have the space to do what we want. Open kitchen, maybe even sell and buy bigger in the suburbs." She laughed, sipping her wine. My son gave a weak chuckle. My grandson's fork froze midair. That was the moment. Something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. I stood up slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floor, and all eyes turned toward me. My voice didn't shake. Since you're talking about the future of this house, perhaps it's time I clarify what that future really looks like. I left the table and returned with the envelope, the finalized will, sealed and stamped from the lawyer's office, no longer just a draft, hidden in quilts. My heart pounded as I placed it squarely in front of them. "You've made a lot of assumptions about what will happen when I'm gone," I said. "It's time to set the record straight." She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh this time, not the cruel, confident one from the farmer's market. "Mom, you don't need to be dramatic. We know you've taken care of it." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "No, you don't know anything." I broke the seal, unfolded the document, and began reading aloud. My son shifted uncomfortably. My grandson leaned in, listening as if it were a bedtime story. And I read that the house would be placed in trust until my grandson came of age, untouchable by greedy hands. That the cedar chest, the photographs, the workshop tools, I had managed to salvage all of it, would belong to him, not them. That they would inherit only modest sums, enough to show fairness, but not enough to fuel their arrogance. Her face paled, the smirk fading into something brittle. My son opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The silence was heavy, electric. My grandson, wide-eyed, whispered, "Really, Grandma, it's all protected." I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, it's yours to carry forward. There's a fact about inheritance law in America. Once a will is properly executed and notarized, it stands as the final word unless contested in court. Families have destroyed themselves fighting over them, turning love into lawsuits. People still debate whether wills are weapons or shields. For me, this was a shield, a barrier between my husband's legacy and her destruction." She slammed her glass down on the table, red wine splashing across the tablecloth. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You're manipulating the boy, poisoning him against us." I looked at her calmly. "I don't need to poison him. He sees the truth for himself." My son muttered something about not making a scene, but the scene was already unfolding, and it wasn't mine to hide anymore. The grandson stood up suddenly, his small voice breaking the tension. "Grandpa's things should be mine. Grandma's right." And in that moment, I saw courage flicker in him again. The courage his father had lost. She glared at him, but even her sharpness couldn't erase the truth he had spoken. I continued reading, each clause another nail sealing their illusions shut. The roses in the garden were to remain untouched. The birdhouse would stay standing as long as possible. Even the armchair she had discarded was mentioned. I had written a line demanding a replacement be made in honor of the man who had built this home with his hands. Symbolic, yes, but symbolism has teeth when backed by law. When I finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. My son finally looked at me, not with anger, not with love, but with the hollow confusion of a man realizing he had underestimated someone his entire life. My daughter-in-law, red-faced, whispered venomously, "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "No, you will." Afterward, I excused myself from the table, leaving the envelope in plain sight. I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and leaned against it. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. For years, I had lived as a ghost in my own house, erased piece by piece. That night, the ghost returned to flesh. There's a cultural tradition in some Jewish families where the reading of a will is done as a ritual with candles lit to remind everyone that life is temporary, but dignity is eternal. People still debate whether rituals soften or harden grief, but as I lay in bed, I thought of that tradition. My reading hadn't been in candlelight. It had been under the harsh glow of an overhead bulb with lasagna cooling on plates. But it was a ritual nonetheless, a passage from silence to truth. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't feel weak either. I felt something I hadn't in years vindicated. The cruel laughter at the market, the birthday humiliation, the erasure of photos, all of it had led to this moment. I had spoken, and the law had spoken with me. In the quiet hours, I imagined the future. My grandson grown standing tall in the house, reading the ledger, tending the roses, knowing he came from builders and survivors. And maybe, just maybe, he would understand that dignity is worth fighting for, even if the battle is fought in whispers and ink. The days that followed the revelation of my will were surprisingly quiet, though not in the way one might expect. The house was still full of tension, of invisible lines drawn in air, of glances and murmurs that spoke louder than words. My daughter-in-law didn't scream, didn't stomp, didn't even attempt overt confrontation. Instead, she became careful, precise, measured. I think the law had finally injected fear where arrogance had once lived. My son remained silent, and my grandson, well, he started following me around a little more, asking questions, listening to stories, touching the photographs, as if the memory itself could guide him. I spent hours walking through the garden, feeling the weight of my husband's legacy in every rose bush, every cobbled stone. The birds sang in the oaks, and I could almost hear the echo of hammers from the workshop, even though it was empty. That space, once the epicenter of my husband's craft, was now protected not by nails or boards, but by my voice, my pen, my understanding of the law. People still debate whether physical objects carry the essence of memory or whether memory lives only in the mind. Standing there, I knew that in our case it was both. One evening, the grandson and I sat in the living room surrounded by the remnants of a house that had tried to erase me. He had brought his notebook, the one he'd begun filling with small stories, observations, and sketches. "Grandma," he asked softly, "can I put some of these in your ledger?" I nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer air filtering through the open window. "Yes, darling," I said. "It's all part of our story now. Every little thing matters." I think that's the most remarkable part of surviving betrayal, finding the flickers of loyalty, small acts of recognition, the quiet allies in a world that seems to have abandoned you. My grandson didn't know the full extent of the cruelty, but he felt it. And even at his age, he responded with integrity and kindness. Psychologists suggest that observing ethical behavior in elders deeply influences a child's moral compass. People still debate whether lessons of resilience are genetic, environmental, or both. I knew that in his case, it didn't matter, the lesson had taken root. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law began to retreat into herself. She stopped attempting to control the house openly. She rearranged her plans, cleaned quietly, spoke softly, and even occasionally gave my grandson small nods of permission to join me. That may have been instinct, strategy, or a combination of both, but I chose to interpret it as the universe finally correcting the imbalance. Silence had its own justice, and in this house, justice had returned. I continued documenting everything: small observations, changes in behavior, moments of remorse or defiance. My ledger grew thicker, heavier with ink, a testament to survival and strategy. Some nights I read passages aloud, not because anyone else needed to hear them, but because saying them anchored my power. Words carry force, especially when written down, structured and sealed in memory. There's an old tradition in some cultures where elders write their life lessons in journals, then lock them away to be discovered by future generations. People still debate whether such documentation fosters wisdom or obsession, but in my house, it became armor. On weekends, I would wander through the workshop, now repurposed, but untouched in its core structure, remembering the hum of machinery, the smell of sawdust, the echo of laughter. I realized that memory, when honored, can't be stolen. They could sell wood, move tools, rearrange shelves, but the essence of what my husband built remained in me, in my grandson, in the stories I told. Objects can vanish. Memory endures. One day, the grandson asked me to show him the exact spot where his grandfather had built the first rocking chair. I guided him carefully, pointing out the marks in the wood, the grooves worn into the floor. He ran his fingers over them reverently, as if tracing a secret map. And in that moment, I understood something vital. Legacy isn't just about possession. It's about connection, about guiding the next generation to honor what came before, even when the living world conspires against it. I started speaking more openly about the ledger with him, teaching him how to document events, how to note small acts of kindness and cruelty alike. Every story matters, I told him. Even the moments that seem insignificant, like a misplaced photograph or a whispered insult, they all shape who we are. He nodded solemnly, grasping the weight of the lesson without understanding its full depth. And perhaps that was perfect. He would grow into understanding at his own pace. Meanwhile, I noticed subtle shifts in the household. My daughter-in-law's sharpness dulled, replaced with a wary politeness. My son began to glance at me differently, though he never spoke openly about the will or my strategies. My grandson's bond with me deepened, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth he could sense, but not yet fully articulate. People still debate whether family hierarchies are ever truly repaired after betrayal, but I knew in my own heart respect had been restored, if not completely, at least in the ways that mattered most. I often sat in the garden at sunset, the sky painted in shades of amber and rose, and reflected on what had transpired. Betrayal had been a storm, fierce and unrelenting, stripping away comfort and security. Yet in facing it, I discovered resilience I hadn't fully known, sharpened by quiet acts of observation, strategy, and subtle defiance. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where adversity leads to new strengths and insights. People still debate whether growth can truly come from cruelty, but I had lived proof. One afternoon, I found myself showing the grandson the old tool bench, now cleared of the items sold by his mother but still standing. "This is where Grandpa built everything," I said. "Everything you see here is part of our family story." He traced the edges with his small hands, eyes wide. "I want to build something too," he said softly, and in that moment I realized my role had shifted from mere survivor to mentor, from the quiet victim to a guide planting seeds of memory and resilience that would one day grow into action. The household, while tense, had transformed in subtle ways. I no longer felt like a ghost. I had rooms that were mine again, spaces where dignity lingered, spaces where my grandson could safely explore the history of his family. The workshop, the ledger, the cedar chest, they were more than objects. They were shields, beacons, and bridges. My daughter-in-law may have thought she controlled the narrative, but she couldn't rewrite memory. At night, I would read passages from the ledger aloud to myself, letting the words echo softly in the dark. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a heartbeat, a gentle reminder that I had reclaimed power in the quietest of ways. Even when sleep finally came, it was tempered with the satisfaction of a plan executed, a story preserved, and a future protected. There's a peculiar fact from anthropology in multi-generational households. Power is often quietly negotiated through storytelling and memory, not through confrontation. People still debate whether stories are stronger than legal authority, but in our house they became inseparable, intertwined with law, love, and loyalty. And as I lay in bed listening to the faint snore of my grandson in the other room, I realized that the family, fractured though it had been, could now breathe a little easier. The days ahead would require vigilance, but I was no longer afraid. Every act of humiliation, every dismissive comment, every sneer and snide remark had been cataloged, considered, and transformed into a narrative that would guide the next generation. The will had sealed the house and its contents, but more importantly, it had reaffirmed the principle that memory, dignity, and loyalty are inheritable in ways money cannot measure. And so, with the ledger beneath the cedar chest, with my grandson learning to document and honor the past, with the household cautiously navigating a new equilibrium, I allowed myself to exhale fully. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind clarity, resilience, and a quiet power that no mockery could erase. There's a special kind of stillness that only comes after long, silent war. Not the kind with shouting or slamming doors, but the kind where each breath is calculated, every smile is a disguise, and every act of survival is invisible to those who think they've already won. That's the war I lived. And now, on the other side of it, I sit here in my garden, the roses blooming just as they always did, untouched by plans or paint or progress. I'm no longer a ghost in this house. I'm the thread holding its memory together. They don't say it out loud, but they move differently. Now my son speaks with more care. My daughter-in-law no longer mocks. She looks at me with wariness now, not because I shouted, but because I didn't. That's what unnerves people the most: quiet resistance. Because it means you've already decided. And my grandson, he has become my anchor. We read together. We walk the garden paths. He keeps his little notebook close and sometimes shares what he writes. Stories, memories, drawings of tools he's imagined from the ones I described. I can already see the man he'll become. Strong, kind, rooted. Not in fear, but in truth. The will is now locked away with the lawyer updated and protected. The ledger stays in its place beneath the cedar chest, waiting for the day he's old enough to understand every page. It holds the record of every betrayal, every moment of loyalty, every decision I had to make to protect what mattered. Some may think it petty to write down those wounds, but if memory is not recorded, it's erased. And I will not be erased. There's a strange calm in me now. I no longer try to please, no longer flinch at silence, no longer expect gratitude. That version of me, the accommodating, hopeful woman who clung to politeness, is gone. And in her place stands someone firmer, steadier. Not cruel, but clear. not bitter, but boundaried. You see, there are things in this life you cannot control, how people treat you, how they remember you or forget you. But there are things you can control, what you protect, what you preserve, what legacy you leave behind. To those of you still holding your tongue at your own dinner table, still feeling like a stranger in the house you built, let me tell you something: quiet does not mean powerless. Love can still carry weight even when it's whispered, and dignity, once you reclaim it, can never be taken from you again. So tonight, if you're listening to this with the lights down low, maybe lying in bed or curled up with a blanket, I want you to know you're not alone. You're not crazy for noticing the small cruelties. You're not wrong to feel erased. And you are not too late to take your story back. Start where you are. Start quietly, but start. Because when the time comes to reveal the truth, it won't be with yelling or vengeance. It will be with the calm certainty of someone who knows they've done what's right, who's told the truth in ink, passed it on to the only eyes that matter, and ensured that memory, not manipulation, will carry the day. Thank you for walking with me tonight. Thank you for listening to the whole story. To my loyal subscribers and to anyone who stayed all the way to the end, your support keeps these stories alive. If this reminded you of your own journey, leave a comment. Share your story. You never know who's listening in the dark, waiting to feel understood. Good night. And if you have time to drop off, edit your own life before someone else does it for you.